Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Rhonda, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. David Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new TEAM therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. David is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine. Hi, David.
Hello, Rhonda.
How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Excited to do a podcast.
Yes, it'll be a really fun podcast, and it is episode 148. Today we're going to ask David some more general questions. And shall we start with the question from Vipul?
Yes, let me just say on average that you folks have sent us lots of great questions. We appreciate it. Please keep recommending the podcast to your friends, because we rely on you to kind of spread the word so we can continue to increase our reach.
Great. So Vipul asks, tell us about your new book, Feeling Great. How will it be different from Feeling Good?
Right. Thank you for that question. Feeling Great will be the first true sequence to Feeling Good. I've written a lot of other books in the meantime, and they're more kind of applications of what was in Feeling Good to different things like dating or whatever. But Feeling Great will have all the new TEAM stuff, particularly positive reframing and all the techniques to reduce resistance. It'll have all of the great cognitive tools that were in Feeling Good and probably more powerfully presented, because they've had 40 years of refinement and research and development, but it's going to have all the new technology as well. And my hope is that it will be at least as helpful to people as Feeling Good, and maybe even more helpful, because it will really help melt away therapeutic resistance, and that's the main barrier to recovery, was when people are ambivalent about recovery.
And isn't there a spiritual aspect to it also?
There is. Well, that's a great point. The Feeling Good kind of went down to self-defeating beliefs as the core deepest issue, like my worthwhileness as a human being depends on my achievements, or I need everyone's approval to feel happy and fulfilled and to be worthwhile. And that was very, very helpful to people. And all that stuff is still really, really great, but now we also have a new dimension that of really taking the reader into enlightenment. And the Buddha 2,500 years ago talked about the Great Death, and that's not just a Buddhist concept. It's woven into pretty much all religions, that there's a rebirth of the self, a death of the old self, and a new birth of a new self. And the Tuesday group, one of our members last Tuesday, we're talking about the Great Death, and he's Christian, and he says this is also a very Christian idea that part of you has to die for a new experience of life. And so we're talking about not one great death that the Buddha talked about, but four great deaths as a kind of ultimate level in personal growth.
I think we should leave it at that, because it's kind of a tease.
Yeah,
that'll make you interested. It is really interesting. Vipul asked another question.
Oh, and it will be coming out in 2020, because I've just finalized an agreement with a publisher. I don't want to announce the details until the contract is signed. They're just typing it up, but I'm very excited that the book will be published and should be coming out in 2020. And it's almost written. In fact, I was working on, I just have a couple chapters to finish up, and I was working on one of them this morning. So,
oh, wow, that's exciting. So Vipul asked another question. It's kind of an interesting question. First, he wants to know, what is schizoaffective disorder, and can people with schizoaffective disorder be helped?
Yeah, the great question there as well. The schizoaffective disorder is a combination of schizophrenic tendencies as well as bipolar, manic depressive illness. Sometimes seem to kind of coexist in the same person. And I treated a woman with this diagnosis in Philadelphia. She was really a wonderful woman. She was a had done actually very, very well for herself. She was a craftsman. I won't name her crafts just to disguise her identity, but she was well known throughout Pennsylvania as kind of a, leading crafts person, and she would be showing at art shows and things like this. But she had had, I don't know, some large number of hospitalizations at the state hospital before she came to me, because she would become paranoid and psychotic and suicidal, a combination of schizophrenic and depressive symptoms from time to time, and would have to be hospitalized. And then she'd kind of pull herself back to fairly normal in between these episodes. And after she was referred to me, and I liked her, we had, I thought, a great therapeutic relationship, but she started going downhill into a suicidal, psychotic state. And so I told her, you've got to come in, and I'm going to hospitalize you here at Penn. And she was cooperative and willing to do that. And so I just set up an appointment for her to come in, and then I would call the hospital, and which was a couple blocks away, and when they had the bed, and then she'd go over and check in. But you remember Stirling Moorey, who was this medical student who visited me and sat in with me for a month, actually on 2 occasions. Stirling was sitting in with me that day, and so she came in. I introduced Stirling to her and said, do you mind just working with Stirling? I've got to call the hospital and make all the arrangements. So they were talking back and forth, and I was making these arrangements, and I knew she was, beyond my abilities. I mean, I was hitting her with powerful drugs and the best psychotherapy. I was seeing her 3 times a week, I think, to try to keep her out of the hospital, and I realized it was impossible. And then just about toward the end of the session, I said, well, are you ready now to go over to the hospital, Meg, or whatever we'll call her? And she says, well, sure, but could I just take that depression test again? And I said, sure, yeah, that'd be great. She took it. Her score was 0.
Oh, my.
And I couldn't believe it. She said, well, Stirling has been so helpful to me. I'm just feeling great. I don't think I need to be in the hospital.
Oh.
And so this is fantastic, yeah. And I canceled the hospitalization, and all that Stirling was doing, he just had a beautiful, warm, kind, and he used a lot of disarming techniques, and very delicate and sincerely interested in getting her to talk. And he wasn't trying to do any fancy footwork, and that just calmed her down. And so the answer to the question is that there's a tremendous amount not only the team can do, but even great empathy skills can do to be helpful to someone with schizoaffective disorder. But sadly, it is a true brain disorder of some type. That the causes of these things aren't known yet, so it wouldn't be like a permanent cure, but it would be a very powerful tool.
Well, it wouldn't be an elimination of symptoms. Permanent elimination of symptoms.
Well, that's just like they would never come back again. But in this case, it is schizophrenia. It is due to some as yet unknown derangement of brain tissue. Some hardwired something there isn't quite right. Mm-hmm. So unlike depression, where well, I guess your point is even depression can come back and you can relapse, but this can come on and push a person into true psychotic episodes where they're hallucinating and delusional. It's just on a whole other level of difficulty.
Right. Well, would team work in between like a psychotic episode, or would team work to prevent future psychotic episodes?
That isn't well known, but in general, I think when you've got doing great psychotherapy with people, like I treated a lot of people with bipolar manic depressive illness once I learned cognitive therapy, and I only had 1 in 20 years that ever had to be hospitalized. And I felt it was the good therapy we were doing between episodes, and the warmth and the trust and the rapport that led to the better outcomes. But because before I did cognitive therapy, I was running the lithium clinic at the VA hospital in Philadelphia when I was a postdoctoral fellow. And they were just going in and out of the door like a revolving door, in and out of the hospital. I mean, none of them were functioning well. And all I had then was just medications and just general support. But once I learned really good psychotherapy skills, the bipolar patients I treated did did much better. So I think it can help the overall prognosis and the overall adjustment to a dramatic degree, but it won't make that underlying disorder disappear.
Right. Okay. So the next question is something I've always been curious what this means too. Guy asked, what is a nervous breakdown?
I don't even know what a nervous breakdown is. It's an old-fashioned term. When I was growing up, they used to have it, and I guess you could think about it as three different things. You could think of it as a panic attack, because a lot of times when people have panic attacks, they think they're on the verge of going crazy, and
Right.
Of course that's something that's super easy to treat, and they're not going crazy, and the treatment is, among other things, to ask the person to try to go crazy. And when they realize they can't, you generally see a complete recovery. And often that intervention only takes 5 or 10 minutes. So that's easily treatable. But if a person doesn't know that and they think they're on the verge of going crazy, they could be telling themselves, I'm having a nervous breakdown. And I think that's what the term means most of the time. But there are two other types of psychotic episodes. Schizophrenia, of course, is true psychosis with hearing voices and delusions, and it's just a very, very severe disorder. That's a true psychotic disorder. But the odd thing is, I probably treated hundreds of patients when I was at Highland Hospital for a couple of years, and they have mainly people. It's a community mental health facility, and they've got tremendous numbers of individuals with severe schizophrenia. I never had someone with schizophrenia who were bothered by the schizophrenia.
Really?
Yeah.
You never had anybody who was depressed because they were schizophrenic?
I don't recall anybody. They were generally upset because they thought people were conspiring against them. They were upset by the voices they were hearing, but they didn't interpret it that they had a psychosis. They thought it was some real problem that they were struggling with.
Because I thought people who have schizophrenia and may have hallucinations, and they know that they're seeing the wall melt, for example, and nobody else is seeing the wall melt, and that's disturbing to them, and they become anxious or depressed because of it, that they're having this hallucination or hearing something that nobody else is hearing.
That could be. I just don't recall ever having patients with that particular issue. They would be coming to me because they needed help dating, or there was something bothering them in their life. But that could be. But that would require a lot of insight that you have this disorder. And I think many people, if not the vast majority with schizophrenia, don't have the insight that there is something wrong with them. They think there's something in the world that's, people are trying to control them with electrical forces, and there's secret messages coming to them through the radio or television set. And it was sad, and I formed really close connections with a number of the young people that I was working with, and was able to make maybe some difference in their life, but definitely nothing very major. And I'm hopeful that one day we'll know the cause and have a better treatment, or some kind of maybe intrauterine prevention type of thing that could occur.
Well, I can think of another definition of nervous breakdown.
Okay.
And I think in the 60s or maybe in the 50s, it was used as a term for women who don't fit into their role. Like, I remember my mother had a cousin, and she, she was really unhappy being only in quotes, a wife and a mother, and she wanted to do other things. And one day I said, "Oh, what happened to Corrine?" That wasn't her name. And my mother said, "Oh, she's in the hospital. She had a nervous breakdown." And it was really and then she came out and, ended up getting a divorce and starting a business. And she was always super happy. Mm-hmm. Well, not super happy, but, she's always much more content with her life. Mm. And I think partly her having a quote unquote nervous breakdown was that she didn't fit into the sex role stereotyping.
It's kind of a sexist thing. I've never heard that, but that could well be. And the other thing where it's common is if someone has true bipolar 1 manic depressive illness, then they can have episodes when they become temporarily psychotic. Maybe she had a manic episode or something. Who knows? But the They'll just suddenly develop these grandiose notions and start doing crazy, wild things and not needing sleep, and everyone can see that they need to be in a hospital, or they need some kind of serious intervention. It's pretty dangerous, because the first time someone gets manic, they don't realize, they don't have insight that anything is going on. They just think, wow, I've got all this power now, and I've got the greatest ideas in the world, and they can get and do get pretty carried away with it.
Well, let's ask Rob's question, because this is a really interesting question. How would you treat a field goal kicker who's afraid of missing the winning field goal? Would you use positive visualizations?
Yeah, this is Rob, who is one of the people my new book is going to be dedicated to. He's really a cool guy, and he asks lots of great questions. And I had a tremendous answer to this with a good example. I can't remember the example now, but let me say in general.
Don't you have an example with Matt May?
Well, yes, but I think I've used it previously on a podcast. But maybe we can use that one. But the thing is that, you see, sports therapists are just like general therapists. They're trying to help people, and that's the problem with it. They like visualizations. If someone's very anxious and they think they're going to strike out, or a pitcher, they'll have them visualize getting a hit, and kind of motivational stuff that motivational speakers do to try to boost people's confidence. And this is just like what we're trying to get away from in psychotherapy, is therapists selling things to people. And we would be, if I were working with, I've worked with a number of famous people who had concerns about their performance, but it was always just like working with the patient, that see what is the first, to empathize, and then what is the problem that you have that you want help with, and then let's look at all of the hidden agenda items. In fact, one of my students gave a perfect example of this just a few days ago. He is working with teenagers, and he was working with a young woman who had achieved some top thing in the United States, the top rated tennis player or dancer or something like that. But then the parents were saying, okay, we're going to send you to this top training camp in New York, and we're going to do all of these wonderful things. And then she started getting an airplane phobia, and every time she'd have to go to her lesson, she you remember this? She got sick. I'm disguising the details a little bit, and the answer to that was the hidden emotion technique. That this was her parents' agenda for her to become the top person in the United States or in the world, get on the Olympic gold medal. That's what her parents wanted for her. But she wanted to date guys and
just go to school.
Yeah, and just be a regular person. And once that came out, then she was able to recover really quickly and to negotiate with her parents. I don't think this is the direction I want to be going in my life. So it can be anything. I use I used to say we have 50 ways to untwist your thinking. In the new book, Feeling Great, I've got over 100 methods that patients can use and therapists can use to change the way you're thinking and feeling and behaving. And any of them could be helpful to a sports person.
Yeah, I mean, a field goal kicker who's afraid of missing the winning goal, I imagine, after going through empathy and, filling out a daily mood log where he identified, I'm saying he because it's probably he, his, the challenging feelings and his negative thoughts. And we went through the cognitive distortions and started doing, looking at what it says really great about him, that he's having this.
Yes, exactly.
Problem,
brilliant.
Then,
yeah.
Eventually we would get to the place where he could defeat those negative thoughts.
But there's a big motivational component here.
Right.
What this? You're worrying that you're going to miss the field goal. What does that show about you that's positive and awesome? And what are some benefits to you?
Yeah.
In having these fears? And then he may suddenly realize, gosh, that's the key to my success. That's how I've gotten as good as I've gotten. And once he's no longer ashamed of that anxiety, then suddenly it becomes really easy to treat. So the short answer, Rob, to your question is we have vastly more tools, in my opinion, than most of the sports psychologists have available to them. And I think we could do a big upgrade in the whole area of sports psychology by including the principles of team therapy.
I agree. Well, here's Michael, who asked, how would you treat someone with the fear of aging? I turned 60 years old in a few months, and I have been experiencing anxiety around not being able to do some of the things that I love as I age.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question. That's also another similar to the sports psychology question, asking questions on a general level. Like there's this formula for treating something called aging, and actually the treatment is highly individualized, and you have to say to the person who's concerned about aging, what are your negative thoughts? What specifically are you concerned about? I had a patient like this who came to me. He came from New York, where he lived in Philadelphia, but he worked in New York, and he had made tremendous amounts of money in the advertising business. And he was depressed because he was aging, and he said, and my problems are real because it's a fact that advertising is a young man's game or a young woman's game. And I'm like 64 now, I'm over the hill. And he says, you can't show me that that's a cognitive distortion either, because what I'm saying is absolute truth. And so how are you going to help me?
Yeah,
and
that's very challenging.
Right, so I went to Beck's seminar. This was the early days where I barely knew anything. And I said, well, how can I help this guy? And Beck, one of his strengths, he had many real strengths, still does, I guess, and he was very good at giving consultations when you're stuck clinically. And he said, well, that's an example of all or nothing thinking. And he thinks you're either, young and 100% or old and 0%. But ask him, how effective do you think you could still be between 0 and 100%? And how effective do you think you'd have to be to feel happy and fulfilled? And so it was really interesting. So we got the guy to start focusing on what he could do, rather than lamenting about what he couldn't do. And he didn't want to retire. So he decided to stay in the game and settle for the fact maybe he'd only earn half as much money. But in those days, he was earning like $600,000 or $800,000 a year, and this was decades ago. And so half of that would still be some huge amount of money, and he really liked that. He just hadn't thought of that, and so he got all happy and went back to work. And then he contacted me again at the end of the year, because it was only a few sessions and he was out of there. And he said the interesting thing is he had by far the biggest year he'd ever had.
Oh, interesting.
So again, it's not aging, but your thoughts about it. Your thoughts create your moods. And when you're depressed or anxious or unhappy about something, the odds are very high that the thought that's upsetting you is
so it's not the fact that you can't remember where you put your keys down. It's the fact that you're disturbed because you can't remember that you put your keys down. Or
yeah,
it's upsetting you. You're having negative thoughts about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. You're beating up on yourself, so you kind of double your trouble. Not only have you lost your keys, but now you've lost your self-esteem as well by telling yourself you're an idiot and
you're no good. I'm too old.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Well, this kind of because you said you only had a few sessions with Michael, this leads into Hidem's question, and he asks, how fast is fast? I notice your frequent use of the term high-speed recovery and even warp speed when describing the benefits of TEAM CBT. How rapidly does the average patient recover?
Yeah, well, this is such an important question, and you can brainstorm and put in your own thoughts about it too, and I feel kind of badly about it. Everything is a two-edged sword, and
why do you feel badly about it?
Well, because for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, almost every time I work with someone, they recover in a single session lasting 2 hours or an hour and a half or 2.5 hours. Not 100% of the time, but almost, sure, 90, 95% of the time. And I've announced that because I wanted people to be excited. The TEAM really appears to represent a major breakthrough in psychotherapy, and I'm hoping it will get some recognition. We need to get some research, and we still have a lot to do. But I wanted to get that message out, and it's truthful. Now, the sad thing about it, where I'm now having second thoughts, is and this puts a lot of therapists under pressure, and maybe get kind of mad at David because they're not getting these kinds of results, and patients will go to them and say, well, Dr. Burns cures people in one session, why can't you, type of thing. And I hadn't thought about that, and I've been feeling very, very confused and sad about it. I think I think the TEAM does represent major breakthrough in psychotherapy. I also think it's difficult to learn.
It is difficult to learn.
And I think some therapists are going to be able to learn it. You've learned it, and probably Heather's learned it, and Matt May has, and Jacob and Jill. And there are a number who have gotten really good at it, and who also, I think, get spectacular results. But it's probably the most challenging form of therapy ever developed, and so all therapists aren't going to be able to learn it. That's why I wrote.
Or maybe they don't want to.
Yeah, they don't. That's exactly right. Yeah, because for a lot of reasons, and that's why I wrote "Feeling Great." I said, well, if the therapists don't want it, I'll give it directly to the patients, because the patients don't mind it at all. They love it. Another thing that I would point out here is I've been measuring things ever since 1978 or 77. I've never had a therapy session that I didn't get at least one measurement.
Wow.
And now we've got us very sophisticated measuring at the start and end of every session, and then they rate me on empathy. And I do it in my teaching too. I had a teaching session yesterday at Stanford with a new group of senior faculty, actually in the Department of Pediatrics. It stunk to high heaven. It was humiliating, although they were very gracious about it and said they actually want more. But we were trying to teach 5 secrets in 1 hour session with these people.
Yeah, I think that's impressive.
And I forgot to ask them, is this something you really want?
Right. Yeah.
So we were like selling, and they were kind of saying, oh, how about this, how about that?
Forcing it on them, and they don't want to learn it.
Yeah.
And that's not such an easy thing to learn.
But I kind of exaggerated how bad it was, because I got a beautiful email. In fact, the chairman of the department, I think is who she is, said she might start coming to the Tuesday group, and they need something like that, and they do.
So you couldn't have done that bad.
Yeah, but what I was trying to say is I paid that price from the very beginning to see when I'm not getting good results. And so I've been working at it for 40, 50 years, and I work really hard, and I take the feedback seriously. And my patients have shaped my behavior. I did a TV show yesterday with this woman in LA, and it's the 3rd time I've done the TV show with her. And I hadn't done one for about 2 years. And
that will be helpful in order to get us onto the Ellen show.
Yeah, that's right. And she said on the show, she said, I saw you at the Burlingame conference doing live therapy. Jill was my co-therapist, and she said it was so unbelievable. She got a little carried away. There were about 500 people in the audience, and she said on TV there were 5,000 to 7,000 people there, and they all went into a state of euphoria. I didn't correct her. She's really, really nice. She has a neat TV show. But Fujan is saying. But the point I was trying to make was, I got disrupted there. What was I trying to say?
Well, we were talking about high-speed recovery. And how rapidly does the average patient recover?
Oh, yeah, but what she was saying, she said, even from 2 years ago, your approach has changed so dramatically. Huh. And she said, you were so tender. And the warmth was so fantastic.
That hasn't changed.
I think in the early days, I was a firebrand, really.
Now you're more tender than you were 2 years ago?
Yeah, she said even in that period of time, she said it was just mind-blowing to see the difference in how you work with people.
That's nice.
And so the answer to the question is, what I ask of therapists is use the assessment tools. I don't think you can do adequate therapy without using them.
But I also think what happens is somebody might come to you with multiple problems. Like last week, I worked with a young woman who was dealing with test anxiety. And I feel pretty confident that I think I worked with her about 2 hours and 15 minutes. And the last 15 minutes was relapse prevention.
Yeah.
I think we could probably say we knocked the test anxiety out of the park. But she has also other problems.
Sure.
So
that's part of it too, because some problems take longer, like relationship problems and habits and addictions. And then there may have someone with bipolar who needs an ongoing relationship, or someone with schizophrenia who may need some support throughout their life. But what I would ask of therapists is to use the measurement tools and do your best. And try to learn and grow. That's what I've always tried to do. And if you're stuck, get a consultation. That's what I've always done. And that's all I ask of therapists. And I just want to apologize if I'm putting out false expectations and make people uncomfortable. That's the last thing that I'd ever want to do.
Oh, okay, thanks. Well, shall we end on that note?
Are there any more? Are there any quickies?
Peter said, is schizophrenia brain disease or just...
Well, we've addressed that.
You already addressed that. And the last one is Brittany said, I have an idea that I think would benefit a lot of us. I would like you, David, to do a podcast on a week or a day in your life. Could you write down the ups and downs of your moods, your triggers, etc., and most importantly, how you deal with them? Do you write out your own negative thoughts on a daily mood log, or what do you do to handle your own ups and downs during a day?
Well, I can answer that with yesterday. I went there and it didn't go as well as I thought. And then what I like to do, and I felt upset and disappointed, a little bit ashamed. But then I say, what specific errors did you make, rather than, well, you're no good. And then I found several specific errors and shared them with my colleagues, because Danielle Levy came and Mariam Hamidi came.
Oh, neat.
And it was really kind of fun. And we all agreed that we'd made several errors. We should never do it in an hour. We should do better agenda setting. And then I had the thought, well, all I can do is try to learn and show humility. And show warmth and enthusiasm. And then, so I just wrote the woman back, and who was kind of the head of the thing, and said I was, a little disappointed in how we did, but we got the feedback. We've done intricate analyses, and would love to show you if you want to take a look. I view teaching as growing and learning. She just wrote the loveliest thing back, and saying they're going to get together as a department and see if they could persuade us to do like a 3-hour seminar with them and really train them. They were just lovely. She wasn't, asking for perfection. And what I tell myself is that, most people aren't looking for perfection from you, David, and you will screw up at times, and just accept that. And Misty the cat will still love you, and Rhonda will still do podcasts with you.
No, you have to be perfect for me. Well, actually, I think
that's how I do.
But that's the thing that makes you sets you apart from other people who have written, as I don't know what to say, as impactful books as you've done, is that you're so you have so much humility about you. And
I also have narcissism.
You have narcissism too, but
gets in my way.
There's somewhat of a balance.
Yeah, right. I try to keep it. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful podcast today, Rhonda.
Okay, well, thank you. It's still an honor to be a part of it. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. The theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.